Talk of peacekeepers in Ukraine extremely dangerous, Kremlin. Moscow raises concerns over Hungarian PM's claims that EU is set to discuss sending some kind of force to Ukraine. A discussion about a possible deployment of Western peacekeepers in Ukraine is potentially a very dangerous idea, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has warned, in response to comments made by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban on Friday. If we are talking about some kind of serious negotiations, then this is a potentially extremely dangerous discussion. In world practice, such forces, as a rule, are used only with the consent of both parties. In this case, it is potentially a very dangerous topic, Peskov told journalists. His statement comes after Orban revealed that EU leaders are close to having a legitimate discussion on the subject of whether or not member states can or should send some kind of peacekeeping force to Ukraine, despite a probable rebuke from Russia over such a move. The Hungarian leader warned that the Ukrainian conflict is only getting bloodier and more brutal, and questioned why EU leaders are not focused on trying to achieve peace in Ukraine through diplomatic means rather than the provision of more deadly tools to Kiev and the fueling of hostilities. If this continues, the danger of a world war is not a literary exaggeration, the Prime Minister said. Since Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine last year, Budapest has consistently opposed sanctions on Russian energy resources and has refused to send military aid to Kiev's forces, citing the need to maintain and to equip Hungary's own army. Meanwhile, Russian MP Alexei Shepa has suggested that if the EU does decide to send a peacekeeping force to Ukraine, it would certainly be interpreted as a direct involvement in the conflict in an attempt to provoke a Russian-NATO war. Shepa stated that in this case Russia could be forced to seek help from its Collective Security Treaty Organization partners, which include Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Putin approves new foreign policy concept. The strategic document places a heavy emphasis on the Western hybrid war against Russia. President Vladimir Putin has signed an updated version of the nation's foreign policy concept, with a focus on Western efforts to undermine Russia amid the Ukraine conflict. Putin explained that the key document had to be altered due to drastic changes in the international landscape. The move was announced by the president on Friday during a meeting with top officials on Russia's Security Council, which included, among others, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Outlining the key provisions of the paper, Lavrov noted that it reflects revolutionary changes on Russia's external perimeter, which received a visible boost after the start of the special military operation in Ukraine more than a year ago. The document puts into the spotlight Western, and particularly American, efforts to undermine Russian interests. The United States and their satellites have used measures, taken by the Russian Federation to protect its vital interests regarding Ukraine, as a pretext to escalate their long-standing anti-Russian policies, and have unleashed a hybrid war of a new type, the document reads. This hybrid war, the concept argues, seeks to weaken Russia in every possible way, including by undermining its military, economic, and technological potential, as well as aiming to limit its sovereignty in external and internal politics and to erode its territorial integrity. However, the paper asserts that Moscow does not see itself as the West's enemy, does not isolate itself from it, and harbors no hostile intentions towards it. It adds that Russia expects Western powers to recognize the futility of confrontational policies and hegemonic ambitions and to eventually return to pragmatic cooperation with Russia based on mutual respect. The Russian Federation is ready for dialogue and cooperation on such a basis, the concept stresses. The foreign policy concept is a key strategic document which outlines the principles, goals, and priorities of Russia's diplomacy and the challenges it faces. The previous version of the document, which was signed in 2016, was heavily focused on fighting terrorism, boosting international cooperation, enhancing Russia's global footprint, and safeguarding the nation's sovereignty. Ukrainian FM gives estimate on EU accession. Ukraine to become an EU member much sooner than many expect unless bloc creates more artificial obstacles, Dmitry Kuleba says. Ukraine has made great progress on its EU accession path, and now the bloc has to reform itself to incorporate the country into its membership, Kiev's top diplomat Dmitry Kuleba has said. The foreign minister made the remarks on Thursday as he spoke at an online event hosted by Chatham House, a leading British think tank on foreign policy. Ukraine is seeking to launch accession talks with the EU next year, Kuleba revealed. Our goal is to open accession talks in 2023. I'm not going to give you a year when Ukraine will become a full member. I will only say that this is going to happen, the diplomat stated. While abstaining from giving any more precise estimates on accession, Kuleba insisted it would happen much sooner than many expect, especially if the European Union does not come up with any artificial new conditions, demands, and procedures to slow this process down. The bloc now has to reform itself to have Ukraine in its ranks, Kuleba asserted, adding that Kiev has already proved that it's ready to do its homework much faster than anyone expects. What is really funny about the European integration of Ukraine is that, for 20 years, the EU was saying to Ukraine, you have to reform yourself, and we will decide then whether you will become a member. That was kind of the premise, he said. While reform was an issue in the first 20 years of Ukraine's EU integration, we will not allow, and we call on the European Union not to make reform of the European Union an excuse for delaying Ukraine's accession. Joining the EU has been among the top talking points for pro-Western Ukrainian politicians for decades already, yet little to no actual progress had been made until the ongoing hostilities between Kiev and Moscow broke out last year. The conflict greatly sped up the joining process, with Ukraine receiving EU candidate status last June. Russia makes goodwill missile pledge to US. Moscow will continue to inform Washington of its launches, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has said. Russia will continue to inform the US about its ballistic missile launches despite Moscow suspending its participation in the New START treaty, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov has stated. Russia placed its participation in the New START treaty, the last remaining nuclear accord with Washington, on hold in February. Explaining the move, President Vladimir Putin said that the 2010 deal had been signed under different circumstances, when Russia and the US did not perceive each other as adversaries. The West had also denied Russian requests to inspect nuclear facilities even though this was allowed for under the treaty, Putin claimed. Speaking about data sharing between Moscow and Washington on Thursday, Ryabkov stated that all types of information exchanges, as well as other elements of verification activities in accordance with the New START, have been suspended. However, he noted the announcement by Moscow that it will adhere to the basic quantitative restrictions established in the New START treaty, and will continue to implement the 1988 agreement on the exchange of notifications on missile launches. Russia will do so out of goodwill, Ryabkov added. The New START treaty limits the number of strategic nuclear warheads deployed by Russia and the US to 1,550. It also confines the two nations to 800 deployed and non-deployed intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, launchers, submarine-launched ballistic missile, SLBM, launchers and nuclear-capable heavy bombers, as well as to 700 ICBMs, SLBMs and strategic bombers equipped to carry nuclear armaments. Ryabkov said that Russia had informed the US of its decision to suspend participation in the New START treaty in both verbal and written form, but that Moscow had not received any such notification from Washington. This means that the US violated its commitments under the New START treaty when it refused to provide Moscow with a biannual report on nuclear stockpiles earlier this week, Ryabkov argued. U.S. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said on Wednesday that Washington was ready to continue exchanging information with Moscow in line with the New START treaty, but only on a reciprocal basis. Since Russia has refused to be in compliance, we have decided to likewise not share that data, Kirby said. Biden rejects call to expel Russians. The U.S. president dismissed demands from the Wall Street Journal, but called for Moscow to release journalist Evan Gershkovich. U.S. President Joe Biden has urged Russia to release Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was detained in the city of Ekaterinburg this week on suspicion of espionage. At the same time, Biden rejected a call by the newspaper to expel Russian journalists or Moscow's ambassador in Washington as a retaliatory step. Biden spoke briefly about the unfolding row on Friday before boarding Marine One to fly to a Mississippi town recently devastated by a tornado. "Let him go," the U.S. leader replied when asked what his message to Moscow was regarding Gershkovich. Asked whether his administration planned to expel Russian diplomats or journalists, as proposed by the WSJ, Biden said, "That's not the plan right now." Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, announced on Thursday that Gershkovich had been detained in Ekaterinburg while allegedly attempting to collect classified information about a Russian defense producer. The reporter is suspected of espionage on behalf of the U.S. government, a charge that could carry a prison term of up to 20 years. The WSJ rejected the allegation as dubious on its face and claimed that the Russian government had taken Gershkovich hostage in preparation for a future prisoner exchange. The Biden administration will have to consider diplomatic and political escalation. Expelling Russia's ambassador to the U.S., as well as all Russian journalists working here, would be the minimum to expect, the newspaper declared in an editorial on Thursday. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Friday that the proposed retaliation would be absurd and wrong, and reiterated the claim that Gershkovich had been caught red-handed. EU nation killed civilians in Iraq, media investigation. The Netherlands has decided to declassify data on airstrikes in the Middle East after media expose. The Dutch government agreed to release previously classified information about its air sorties in Iraq and Syria, after media exposed as false claims that no civilians were killed in a 2016 strike by the European nation on a building in Mosul, Iraq. A U.S. military assessment had identified the target as a terrorist HQ. The database, released on Thursday, details Dutch F-16 missions between October 2014 and December 2018, which were part of Operation Inherent Resolve, a US-led military campaign against Islamic State, IS, formerly ISIS. It disclosed over 2,200 weapon deployments relating to over 600 airstrikes. The Dutch Ministry of Defense also pledged to conduct its own investigation into suspected killings of civilians by anti-IS coalition forces. The move was in reaction to an expose published on the same day by the Dutch public broadcaster NOS, its current affairs program Nieuwsuur, and the newspaper NRC. It provides evidence that at least 7 civilians, including a 3-year-old girl, were killed in a Dutch airstrike at a residential building in Mosul on March 22, 2016. The strike hit a residence outside of the campus of Mosul University, where academics and their families were housed. The raid was previously detailed in a 2017 assessment by the U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, which was obtained by the New York Times and released in 2021. CENTCOM claimed that the building was used by IS militants as a military headquarters and that no civilians were allowed into the building. The Dutch media research, which was carried out with the help of Air Wars, a London-based NGO which records claims of civilian harm in airstrikes, found eyewitnesses who contradicted the U.S. account. Residents of the building said militants were present in the neighborhood because they had their wives and children housed in the homes of people who'd fled from Mosul. But they never detected any military activity and believe the U.S. had every opportunity to know this, considering that the coalition forces constantly flew surveillance drones over the area. The Dutch government deflected accusations of underreporting civilian casualties, after national media reported in 2019 that at least 70 non-combatants had been killed in a 2015 airstrike on the Iraqi city of Hawija. Prime Minister Mark Rutte referred to CENTCOM at the time, stating that they were the arbiter in such cases and have all the knowledge and experience to make assessments authoritatively. EU underestimating Russian economic capacity, Orban. The country has managed to adapt to sanctions after first restrictions were introduced in 2014, Hungarian leader says. Western countries are making a mistake by underestimating Russia's ability to adapt to sanctions, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated on Friday. According to Orban, Moscow had demonstrated it could adjust its economy to restrictions following the first wave of Western sanctions, introduced after Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine and to reunify with Russia in 2014. I remember well that in 2015 we exported a lot of food products to Russia. In 3 years, Russia has built its agriculture and food industry to such an extent that if Hungary wanted to export food there today, it would either not work or be much more difficult than before the imposition of sanctions, the politician told Kossuth Radio. The Russian economy has shown its resilience to sanctions, and underestimating the ability of a country as huge as Russia to adapt to restrictions is a fatal mistake, Orban added. The Hungarian premier is a vocal critic of the bloc's approach to the conflict in Ukraine, and has repeatedly argued that sanctions are hurting the EU more than they hurt Russia. Orban has previously insisted that the punitive measures were supposed to hit Russia, but hit Europe. The sanctions have had a devastating impact on Budapest, he added, by sending energy prices soaring and raising costs throughout the economy. EU sanctions introduced against Russia over its military operation in Ukraine have cost Hungary's economy €10 billion but have failed to stop the conflict, according to the Prime Minister. Meanwhile, Russia has survived the loss of Western markets and its economy is developing in a new way, with GDP expected to grow as soon as the second quarter of this year, President Vladimir Putin said earlier in March. Russia's foreign trade grew by more than 8% last year, while inflation is expected at around 4% this year. This comes as other Europeans are trying to convince everyone of the imminent collapse of the Russian economy, even though EU inflation rates are higher, the Russian president noted. Japan bans exports of kids' toys to Russia. The restrictions are intended to prevent the strengthening of Russia's industrial base. Japan has introduced new restrictions against Russia on Friday, adding children's toys to a new list of goods subject to an export ban. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry has revised its trade restrictions on goods that contribute to the strengthening of Russia's industrial base, according to an official statement issued on Friday. The updated list includes goods such as steel, aluminum, construction machinery, electrical equipment, radio equipment for navigation, aircraft, and spacecraft. The list also features goods for children, such as toys, scale models, puzzles and items on wheels, bicycles and prams. In the more than 200-year history of sanctions, there have never been bans on the supply of goods for children, Andrei Suzdaltsev from the Faculty of World Economy and World Politics at the Higher School of Economics wrote on his Telegram channel. Apparently, Japan has declared war on the children of Russia, he added. According to a report by independent news network BNN, the inclusion of toys in the export ban, especially the popular Pokemon franchise, highlights Japan's intent to exert pressure on Russia through various avenues, including targeting consumer goods that hold both cultural and economic significance. The embargo will come into force on April 7th. Tokyo's latest ban is an expansion of restrictions imposed earlier this year, which covered items that can be used for military purposes, dual-use goods, certain commodities, and semiconductors. Since the start of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine, Japan has imposed sanctions on the Russian leadership, banks, and companies, and stripped Russia of its most favored nation status in trade. Tokyo has blacklisted over 50 enterprises and more than 900 individuals. The Japanese authorities have also frozen the assets of Russian banks and the assets of nearly 40 companies and organizations. Moscow responded by including Japan on its list of so-called unfriendly countries, and banned dozens of Japanese politicians and media representatives from visiting Russia. Among other measures, Russia ended an arrangement dating back to 1991 that allowed Japanese citizens to visit the Kuril Islands without a visa, and has broken off talks with Japan on formally ending the Second World War, citing Tokyo's openly unfriendly conduct. The two states never formally concluded a peace treaty after World War II, due to a dispute over the 4 southernmost islands in the Kuril chain, which Japan calls its northern territories. Germany can make do without Russian gas, regulator. Consumers are still being urged to conserve energy ahead of next winter. Germany is planning to fill up its gas storage facilities for next winter without Russian supplies, according to the head of the Federal Network Agency, Klaus Müller. The official said that the nation's tanks are not empty ahead of the end of the current heating season, claiming that this will allow Berlin not to turn to Russian piped gas. We are now coming out of the winter with relatively full storage facilities. This will help fill the storage facilities over the summer without Russian pipeline gas, Müller told Germany's DPA news agency on Thursday. According to data provided by the regulator, Germany's gas storage facilities were 64.3% full as of Tuesday. On November 14th, they were 100% full. While the EU has not banned Russian pipeline gas imports, their flows dwindled significantly after Ukraine-related sanctions were imposed last year. They were also affected by the sabotage that disabled the Nord Stream pipeline, one of the main routes for Russian gas to Europe. As a result, Germany no longer receives Russian gas directly. Germany currently receives liquefied natural gas, LNG, via floating terminals in Wilhelmshaven, Lubmin, and Brunsbüttel. It is rapidly building up its own infrastructure to replace Russian supplies of natural gas. Last week, a member of the German Bundestag, André Hunko, claimed that the shift had turned the nation's dependence on Russian natural gas into an addiction to LNG from the US. Brits warned of empty shelves in grocery stores. Shortages of fresh vegetables could become commonplace in the UK in the near future, farmers warn. UK consumers may have to get used to empty shelves in supermarkets due to unprecedented shortages of fresh vegetables amid record food price inflation and skyrocketing energy costs, Reuters reported on Tuesday. British shoppers have been experiencing a scarcity of fresh food for months as sales of tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers and some fruits were limited by most of the country's largest supermarkets due to supply deficiency. Poor weather conditions have disrupted harvests in Europe and North Africa, while inflation led to higher costs for produce from the UK's key markets such as Spain, the outlet said. Britain imports around 95% of its tomatoes over the winter, according to the British Retail Consortium. In January, the UK bought 266,273 tons of vegetables, the smallest amount for any January since 2010 when the country's population was 7% smaller than at present, tax office data showed. This comes as British consumers are grappling with record grocery price inflation, which has surged to 17.5% in the 4 weeks to March 19th. Analysts say a supply squeeze is resulting in higher costs, while the country's departure from the EU poses a greater logistical challenge for bringing vegetables to the island as exporters are discouraged by additional paperwork. Meanwhile, British farmers are struggling with higher energy costs, which reduce their ability to grow fruits and vegetables in heated greenhouses. There are real risks that empty shelves may become more commonplace, President of the National Farmers Union, Minette Batters, told Reuters. The union expects fresh vegetable production to be the lowest this year since 1985 due to the decision to exclude agriculture from a government support scheme which provides aid to companies hit by high energy costs. Farmers also warn that the shortage of tomatoes will widen to other homegrown crops, including cauliflower and carrots. French energy giant sued for war crimes complicity, AFP. Total Energies is reportedly accused of helping produce fuel for Russian warplanes. 2 associations have filed a complaint against French oil and gas major Total Energies, accusing the firm of war crimes complicity in Ukraine, AFP reported on Thursday, citing sources familiar with the case. According to the news agency, the complainants are the France-based Darwin Climax Coalition and the Ukrainian group Razom We Stand, who accused the energy major of holding a stake in a firm which operates a Russian natural gas field, supplying products that are eventually refined into jet fuel. They claim the fuel is used by Russian warplanes in Ukraine. By continuing to exploit a deposit producing gas condensate which is then transformed into fuel, Total Energies contributed to supplying the Russian government with the means necessary for the commission of war crimes, the complaint reportedly says. Total Energies has rejected the claims, calling them outrageous and defamatory. These accusations against our company, which conducts its operations in strict compliance with European Union policy and applicable European sanctions measures, are particularly serious and unfounded in the light of the explanations we have provided, the company stated. Last October, the two associations filed a similar complaint, which was closed with no further action after an exhaustive legal and factual analysis of all the elements submitted by the complainants and, at its own initiative, Total Energies, according to French anti-terrorism prosecutors. Lawyers for the associations said they planned to contest the decision, and accused the prosecutors of bowing to political pressure. Brazil and China signed pact to abandon dollar. The two BRICS nations will now reportedly trade in their own currencies. Beijing and Brasilia have signed an agreement on trade in mutual currencies, abandoning the US dollar as an intermediary, and are also planning to expand cooperation on food and minerals. According to media reports, the deal will enable the two BRICS members to conduct their massive trade and financial transactions directly, exchanging renminbi for real and vice versa, instead of using the US dollar for settlements. The expectation is that this will reduce costs, promote even greater bilateral trade and facilitate investment, AFP quoted the Brazilian Trade and Investment Promotion Agency as saying on Wednesday. The countries also reportedly announced the creation of a clearinghouse that will provide settlements without the US dollar, as well as lending in national currencies. The move is aimed at facilitating and reducing the cost of transactions between the sides, and getting rid of dollar dependence in bilateral relations. The People's Bank of China, PBOC, announced earlier that such arrangements will boost the usage of the renminbi for cross-border transactions between enterprises and financial institutions in the two countries, and further facilitate bilateral trade and investment. China has been Brazil's largest trading partner for more than a decade, with bilateral trade hitting a record $150 billion last year. According to the Secretary for International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance of Brazil, Tatiana Rosito, 25 countries are already making settlements with China and UN. Ghana slams undemocratic meddling by U.S. Remarks by visiting U.S. VP Kamala Harris on LGBT laws should not be tolerated, the country's parliamentary speaker has said. Ghana intends to pass its Family Values Act regardless of what the U.S. says, Speaker of the Parliament Alban Bagbin has told lawmakers. He was speaking in response to remarks by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris on her African tour in Ghana this week, that LGBT rights were a human rights issue. Bagbin dismissed Harris's remarks. These things should not be tolerated. That is undemocratic. What is democracy? That somebody else would have to dictate to me, as to what is good and what is bad? Unheard of. Bagbin said on Tuesday, at a meeting with legislators to discuss the proposed promotion of proper human sexual rights in Ghanaian Family Values Bill. In a joint press conference with President Nana Akufo-Addo on Monday, Harris did not directly address the bill, but affirmed that LGBT rights were an issue that we consider to be a human rights issue, and that will not change. Last week, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters at the White House that LGBT rights were something that's a core part of our foreign policy, and it will remain so. Bagbin told the Ghanaian lawmakers that they need to legislate and should not fear outside pressure. Don't be intimidated by any person, he said. What are you afraid of, if you have the whole people behind you? If God is with you, who can be against you? Last week, the parliament in Uganda approved a law that made aggravated homosexuality punishable by death, and recruitment, promotion, and funding of homosexual activities with up to life in prison. Ghana's proposal would make same-sex intercourse a second-degree felony, punishable by 3 to 5 years in prison, with those promoting activities banned under the bill facing 5 to 10 years behind bars. The bill will be passed, Bagbin told the lawmakers. He also reminded President Akufo-Addo that his job was to execute the laws, not to legislate himself. This is a word to His Excellency the President, there is no way he can intervene, he said. Let's get this clear, once this bill is before here, he is not in charge. I am in charge. Harris arrived in Accra on Sunday evening, on the first leg of the trip that would take her to Tanzania and Zambia as well. The White House said her visit would focus on democracy, climate change, security, the economy, and the conflict in Ukraine. The U.S. has also pledged $100 million in aid for Ghana and nearby Benin, Togo, Guinea, and Côte d'Ivoire. China to continue to back BFA's role in promoting global prosperity, Premier. China will continue to support the BOAO Forum for Asia, BFA, in playing a positive role in promoting common prosperity in Asia and the world, Chinese Premier Li Qiang said on Wednesday. Li made the remarks during a meeting with Ban Ki-moon, chairman of the BFA, as well as some members of the BFA Board of Directors, and representatives of the BFA Council of Advisors and Strategic Partners, in BOAO, Hainan Province. Li said that the theme of this year's BFA annual conference, which is an uncertain world, solidarity and cooperation for development amid challenges, fully reflects the current situation and the requirements of human society for progress and development. China and Asia could play a larger role in dealing with the current uncertainties faced by the world, he said, adding that, with the spirit of win-win cooperation and common development, the human society will find a way to share the fruits of peaceful development. The Chinese economy is now showing a momentum of stabilization and recovery, Li said. We will ensure steady growth, employment, and prices through strong and effective implementation of macro policies, improve the business environment by steadfastly deepening reform and opening up, vigorously boost market expectations and confidence, and make new strides in promoting high-quality development. Li said China will open its door even wider to the world, and welcomes foreign companies to invest and do business in China. It is hoped that the BFA will promote interactions between Asia and the world, and explore the BOAO proposal for strengthening global governance and building a community with a shared future for humanity, said Li. For their part, Ban Ki-moon and other members of BFA Board of Directors said that China's political stability and reform and opening up have injected great certainty into the world. They noted that the Chinese path to modernization has opened up a new path for developing countries to achieve development. All parties are willing to work with China to jointly address global challenges such as climate change and build a more stable global industrial and supply chain, they added. UN urges AI ethics recommendation enforcement after GPT-4 pause call. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, on Thursday called on governments to fully and immediately implement its recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence, AI, following a call by over 1,000 tech workers including Elon Musk for a pause in the training of the most powerful AI systems including ChatGPT. The recommendation was endorsed by all UNESCO member states in November 2021, and it is the first global framework for the ethical use of AI. It guides countries in maximizing the benefits of AI and reducing the risks it entails. It contains values and principles, and detailed policy recommendations in all relevant areas. The world needs stronger ethical rules for artificial intelligence. This is the challenge of our time. UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of AI sets the appropriate normative framework and provides all the necessary safeguards, UNESCO Director General Audrey Azoulay said in a press release. According to UNESCO, AI innovations may raise ethical issues, especially discrimination and stereotyping, including the issue of gender inequality. AI may also have a negative impact on the fight against disinformation, the right to privacy, the protection of personal data, and human and environmental rights. Industry self-regulation is clearly not sufficient to avoid these ethical harms, which is why the recommendation provides the tools to ensure that AI developments abide by the rule of law, avoiding harm, and ensuring that when harm is done, accountability and redressal mechanisms are at hand for those affected, the organization said. U.S. advocacy group asks FTC to stop new OpenAI GPT releases. The Center for Artificial Intelligence and Digital Policy, CAIP, a tech ethics group, is asking the U.S. Federal Trade Commission, FTC, to stop OpenAI from issuing new commercial releases of GPT-4, which has wowed some users and caused distress for others with its quick and human-like responses to queries. In a complaint to the agency on Thursday, which is on the group's website. The guide called GPT-4 biased, deceptive, and a risk to privacy and public safety. The formal complaint to the FTC follows an open letter signed by Musk, AI experts, and industry executives that called for a 6-month pause in developing systems more powerful than OpenAI's newly launched GPT-4, citing potential risks to society. The group in its complaint said OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 fails to meet the FTC's standard of being transparent, explainable, fair, and empirically sound while fostering accountability. UK's world first T-pylons herald greener new future of electricity. Electricity is now flowing to homes and businesses through the UK's first new electricity pylon designed for nearly a century, according to the country's national grid. The new shape is smaller and consists of just 10 parts, making it simpler and faster to install. First new design of a pylon for National Grid within the last 100 years, said National Grid's project director, Stephen Haskane. The pylon itself was selected from over 250 design ideas which were put forward in an international competition. The new T-pylons are part of a 57-kilometer high-voltage electricity line that will potentially connect 6 million homes and businesses to new sources of low-carbon energy, helping the UK in meeting its net zero by 2050 target. The new structures are 35 meters tall, around a third lower than traditional 48-meter lattice towers, and have a reduced electromagnetic radiation field. They do look much nicer, they're sleeker, and really do signify the low-carbon energy that will be transported along them, Haskane said. The upgraded electricity line will carry low-carbon energy when the joint French-Chinese nuclear power station at Hinkley Point C eventually starts generating in 2027, 10 years later than planned. Iran and Saudi Arabia, rivals no more? Iran and Saudi Arabia have agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations after 7 years of hostility. The deal was reached with the help of China. In a key diplomatic victory, a deal was struck between Iran and Saudi Arabia in Beijing. The deal was brokered between the two powers after 4 days of Chinese-mediated talks. Riyadh and Tehran agreed to reopen their embassies and re-establish diplomatic relations. The agreement includes mutual respect for sovereignty and non-interference in internal affairs. The deal also activates a 2001 previously signed security cooperation and trade agreement. It indicates that China's presence in the Gulf, in the wider Middle East, is growing. It indicates to the U.S. that Saudi Arabia and other Gulf partners have other options. Christian Coates Ulrichsen, Fellow for the Middle East, Baker Institute, Rice University told the AP. Saudi Arabia broke off ties with Iran in 2016 after protesters stormed its diplomatic posts in Tehran. The demonstrations were in response to Saudi Arabia executing a Shiite cleric. Relations between the two countries have been fractured since then. The division culminated in both nations fighting a proxy war in Yemen. The two countries also have competing interests in Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq. The normalization was welcomed by Egypt, Bahrain, the UAE, and China. China will continue to play a constructive role in handling hotspot issues, demonstrating our responsibility as a major nation, said Wang Yi, China's top diplomat. Wang Yi described the agreement as a victory for peace and dialogue. TikTok CEO grilled in U.S. over China ties amid public outcry over app's crackdown. TikTok CEO Xiao Zhichu testified before a congressional committee on Thursday as the popular social media platform faces a potential forced sale or ban in the United States. Representing a critical moment that is not only a fight for TikTok's survival but also another fierce contest between two of the world's great powers, China and the U.S. U.S. lawmakers badgered Chu about potential Chinese influence over the platform and claimed that short videos on it were damaging to the mental health of children. During a House hearing entitled TikTok, How Congress Can Safeguard American Data Privacy and Protect Children from Online Harms. On the potential Chinese influence over the platform, Chu said at the hearing that although ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, was founded by a Chinese entrepreneur, it has grown into a multinational company. Xu repeatedly denied that the app shares data or has connections with the Communist Party of China, adding that TikTok remains a platform for free expression that cannot be manipulated by any government and allows for third-party independent oversight. Xu argued that the platform was doing everything in its power to ensure safety for its 150 million American users who love our app. According to CNN, independent researchers have backed Xu's assertions. In 2020, The Washington Post worked with a privacy researcher to study the app and concluded that it does not appear to collect any more data than the typical mainstream social network. The following year, Pei-Yin Lin, a Taiwan-based researcher at the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab, performed another technical analysis that reached similar conclusions. Content creators, U.S. reps decry TikTok crackdown. Meanwhile, the U.S. government's single-minded crackdown on TikTok does not appear to represent the app's 150 million U.S. users. A group of U.S. internet celebrities reportedly told Congress ahead of the hearing that banning the app would provoke widespread opposition. It is one of the most powerful tools that young people have to engage each other and to get civically involved, said Aidan Cohn-Murphy, an American content creator and activist with around 300,000 TikTok followers, The Wall Street Journal reported on Wednesday. American politics isn't monolithic about cracking down on TikTok, either. U.S. Representatives Jamal Bowman, Mark Pocan, and Robert Garchon on Wednesday said they opposed any potential ban on the app. Jamal said the drive to ban TikTok stems from anti-China hysteria, reported the New York Times. Legal questions over TikTok ban. Reuters cited experts saying that it would be difficult for the U.S. to completely ban TikTok without a firm legal basis. One expert said any move to block the app likely depends on the passage of legislation like the Restrict Act, a bipartisan bill introduced by U.S. senators this month that would give the Commerce Department new powers to ban foreign technology that poses a national security risk. U.S. courts previously blocked the Trump administration from banning TikTok on grounds that it violated free speech protections. Experts say passage of the restrictions bill would further empower the U.S. government to circumvent speech protections in current law, according to Reuters. China says it opposes forced sale of TikTok. TikTok's crackdown in the U.S. has drawn the attention of the Chinese government, with the Ministry of Commerce saying on Friday that it opposes any possible U.S. plan to force TikTok's Chinese owners to sell the short video platform over security concerns. A forced sale would seriously damage investors from multiple countries including China, and hurt confidence in investing in the U.S., said Ministry spokesperson Xu Jiuding. Xu added that the potential sale or spin-off of TikTok involves technology export and must go through administrative licensing procedures in accordance with Chinese laws and regulations. Suppression of Chinese companies detrimental. Meanwhile, some are linking the recent crackdown on TikTok to the U.S. government's previous actions against tech giant Huawei on the grounds of national security, saying it also lacks any evidence. Xiang Ligong, president of the Information Consumption Alliance, told Global Times that the U.S. government does not have a complete blueprint for industrial suppression, and to a large extent, the current actions are just a posturing for the election and a political show to attract voters. Xiang said that such suppression of Chinese companies completely violates international rules, undermines the order of industrial supply chains, harms the interests of China and the U.S., and is detrimental to the global economy.